Okay, we're going to look at the concept of respectability in the long 19th century, which covers basically from about the 1780s to around World War I, 1910s. The phrase, the politics of respectability, goes back to Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, 1994, in her book on the Baptist Women's Convention, which is a great history. And she brought out three aspects of what she calls the politics of respectability. First of all, a constant need for self-regulation and self-control and moral behavior, because the idea is that you're constantly being watched by white eyes, and so you constantly have to be under control, you have to be self-possessed, you have to be behaving morally, in order to contrast with the racist stereotypes, and that this is critically important for Black women who face such large numbers of negative racial stereotypes. Secondly, that this is a tool of resistance against racism and the system of Jim Crow was what they were talking about, but systems of racial oppression. That you are counterbalancing that by demonstrating that Black people are not like the people that racist stereotypes portray. And then finally, the need that you have to correct people, Black people who are not living up to these ideals of respectability, who are not self-controlled, who are not moral, who are not living up to these ideals. Often the people that they're talking about are the poor, or deviants, or lower class Black behavior often is what it's associated with, though not always. Sometimes it's the upper class that's being deviant. But it's the idea that everybody needs to follow along and behave in this respectable way. The term respectability, respectable is older, but respectability itself comes from 1784 in English. And in the 1780s, the concept of being respectable develops this new moral meaning. And other European nations, like the Russians, the French, the Germans, develop their own terms that are quite similar to respectability. The idea is now that a respectable person was someone who deserved respect primarily because of his or her high moral standing, their manners, they know how to behave properly, and their education. They're living up to conventional standards about moral and ethical behavior. And this is particularly tied to the new middle class, which is just emerging in the 19th century. But also, a number of working class people look at this ideal of respectability and use it as well. So it's predominantly tied to the middle class, but it's also used by people in the working class. Aspiring African Americans. This is in the antebellum period where we start seeing a growing Black elite who are people who have a little bit more money, a little bit more education, who really embrace middle-class ideals and morals about respectable conduct. So they're people who argue that you need to engage in hard work, thrift, not wasting your money, cleanliness, temperance, not drinking, education, Christian morality. And once again, the idea is that this is going to contradict the racism of the pro-slavery people. And so it's a way of fighting against their racism. And it was a way of making your personal conduct have political significance. Now, it's a little bit more complicated, though, because very few African American people had the financial independence of white middle-class people. And frankly, often, even though you were a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, a minister, you might not be economically that far from the economic status of the Black poor working class. More than that, everybody has to live in black areas. So everybody's all mixed together in living residential areas. So if you want to prove that you're part of the black middle class, you really do it by demonstrating your education, demonstrating your manners, demonstrating your proper moral behavior. Black people also face the problem that regardless of their manners, they were excluded from the new middle class public spaces like transportation. You want to ride the omnibus, black people were forced to ride outside. You want to go to the galleries to see the paintings, often black people weren't allowed in. You want to go to lecture halls to listen to the new scientific lectures. Often, once again, African Americans were excluded. So it was hard trying to be middle class and black. What does this mean for black women? Well, if you look at what black ministers said, if you look at what black newspapers said, the official advice is black women should be domestic. They should defer to their husbands. They should be highly moral. They should be caregivers. They should remain at home. They should leave wage-earning, political activism, and positions of authority to the men in their lives. The problem is, all of that sounds really good, but it's pretty much impossible. Even if you're a minister's wife or a lawyer's wife, you might have to bring in some extra money into the home by taking in boarders or doing laundry for other people. So the reality is, for all but a very few black women, they have to work. They have to bring in wages. And so it's this combination of you're still expected to be a caregiver, you're still expected to do all the housework. Often you're still expected to defer to husbands, though black women, because they brought in wages, probably were a little less likely to do what they're told. You're still supposed to be a caregiver, but you can't stay at home, and you must bring home wages. So respectable women sort of developed their own ways of thinking about what it meant to be respectable. And they focused on some other characteristics that they see are critically important and are signs that they're living a respectable life in the world and deserve respect from others. So having orderly homes. In other words, you're clean, it's neat, your family is well clothed, your home is clean. Behaving lawfully, not violating the law, living according to the laws of the city or wherever it is that you live. And perhaps most importantly, economic independence. You are able to support yourself or keep your family self-supporting. And so these characteristics, a lot of poor black women see as signs of their own respectableness. Maybe they can't achieve the other ideals, but they can achieve a version of respectable that they see as very important. By the late 19th century, there's an increasing amount of class tensions. And this plays out in the women's club movement, which I'll talk a little bit more in another lecture. But these tensions come from a growing number of elite, middle-class, elite black women who take leadership roles in these women clubs and in popular culture. Some of them become lecturers, public speakers, writers, and they see themselves as having the responsibility of calling for ordinary black women to become respectable, to embrace morality, to embrace the middle-class version of respectability. And the phrase that the national organization uses is lifting as we climb, which sort of implies as these women themselves, these elite women saw themselves as becoming more and more advanced, they will also bring ordinary black women along with them. And then there's a number of cases in which there's a fair amount of resentment of Black middle class and elite women by ordinary Black women, working class and poor Black women, who see themselves as being looked down on and disparaged by these leaders. And sort of the counterbalance to this is the church women, the women who are in groups tied to the church, often more the working class women, who have their own focus and see themselves as the real moral leadership of the community and the real activists of the community. And they argue for sexual purity, cleanliness, thrift, temperance, manners, really the same kind of characteristics that we've been seeing pop up in different versions of respectability all along. And once again, they see this as the tool that is going to disprove white racism and show that white racism is wrong because of the way that they live will make it clear that that's not true, that's not real. They also see it as a way, particularly sexual purity, as a way to protect women from sexual violence. And the idea is, and this is a really old idea for women, that if you dress respectably, if you behave respectably, that you won't be sexually attacked. These are also women who spend a lot of time in trying to fix other Black people. They have leaflets, newspaper columns, neighborhood campaigns, lectures, door-to-door visitors, trying to stop a variety of things that they see as undermining Black respectability. Things like gum chewing, loud talking, wearing gaudy colors, all the various kinds of behavior that are seen as not properly respectable. Dancing. Oh goodness, dancing. And music, jazz, and the blues. So in conclusion, respectability is an important ideal for a lot of Black women in particular. It's something that they look to as an important way of proving themselves and proving that they are not all of those horrible racial stereotypes, that there's something else. It's also something that got used as a tool of control, often by elite and middle-class Blacks and some working-class Blacks, against poor working-class African Americans who don't live up to what they see as the rules of respectability. This is going to pop up again when we're reading about Black young women during the Great Migration. It's seen as a way of fighting against racism by disproving it, showing that that's not really how Black people are. And so it's a political tactic, but it's also a tactic that individuals could use. So if, for example, in the late 19th century, you are appealing to get a widow's pension because your husband was a Civil War veteran, a really important part of that application would be trying to prove that you were respectable.